Hello world, and welcome to my Snowflake remix breakdown. Today I want to walk you through the whole song, basically, and yeah, maybe you can find some techniques in there or something that you find entertaining to watch. I'll try to make it as short as possible, and I split up the whole project into little bits for the sake of my CPU, so don't worry about all those big spaces here. The song is starting with this Glockenspiel loop, and it's getting faster and faster, and that is realized by automating this time stretch now. I used this original sample from the Snowflake remix and put these loop points in Edison, and then wanted to repeat that essentially. It's getting faster and faster until it's just a blurred mess, and I resampled that into a sample and took out the volume and blended in some reverb instead. I'm using this common reverb here. I luckily won it through the Rewind Remix competition, and it's a really cool reverb plugin. And it has this huge epic preset I'm using most of the time. And here's some imager that's just enhancing the width. Next up, we got the original Snowflake background atmosphere. And we got these chimes, beautiful chimes, and this, again, really beautiful pad thing. I'm slowly taking out the lows here to make it then blend well with the Comet reverb. And that's pretty much it until the drums come in, introduced by this little low end sweep. This is how the verse drums sound. We got this kick. It's from Splice if you want to use it. And sounds like this. And originally it has this high-end tail. I already cut it off by volume a bit. But then, it was still too much to me. So I automated the high end on the EQ. And the second EQ is for making it sound a little bit more muffled because I'm using it on the drop as well, where this EQ is getting deactivated over here. Then, as you could hear, we got this clap. I'm increasing the lows here, and we got these hats. And again, I have this muffle EQ that emphasizes the low end, the fundamental of the hat, if you will. Makes it sound more real, I guess. And those are also only activated throughout the verse. You can see my sidechain curve here. I'm sidechaining only the lows. So I have the sidechain mixer track here, and it's splitting up into lows, mids, and highs. And only the lows get automated in the verse. In the drop, there's a little more to that, but we'll come to that later. So that's pretty much all instruments except for the main one, which is this bass guitar. It is a flex guitar, preset I really like, and I activated this mono option, put up the slide knob so we can get these little glides here. And I automated the pitch slider here. Mostly on the flex bass guitar presets, you get a lot of bass information, but not a lot of sub, so I increased that because we're in a rather electronic context where we want sub, and finally taking out the lows a bit towards the end of the first verse. And then when we're going full dry here, you can hear this piano. And it's the original piano, pitched down by 15 semitones, 3 to fit my key, and another octave, so it sounds really deep and mellow. And right when the drums come back in, I'm taking out the lows of it, so we only get these little sparkle notes on top. Next instrument is this guitar. This is another flex guitar. I really like it. It has some built-in effects. I switched them off and only activated the delay on the second instance. And as you can see, those are the normal chords. And then there's these little bits that have glide on them. So the same technique here as with the bass guitar. Just placing single notes there. And we got some EQ. Some EQ to take out the low sides. And some OTT, apparently. And yeah, going towards the next section, I'm increasing the reverb. And then we hear this little sine plug. I mean, it doesn't really sound like a sine, does it? But it is one, almost. And almost no effects on it. Yeah, big reverb tail. I'm using it a bit more in the second verse. So, shaker. Cymbal transition. And oh yeah, it has a lot of reverb. The first thing I'm introducing from the next section are these chines. They are this weird wave form. You can see how much the chorus pitch is turned up. But yeah, all it's meant to do is play some random notes. As you can see, using the randomizer function of FL's piano roll and putting a frequency shifter on it. So we're going full atonal, and we only got these high bits used of this. We got some soothe on it. Yeah, my CPU can't really take that. And some stereo enhancing, some compression. We got another EQ for some movement towards the next section, which is the drop. And yeah, I called this section the Wobble Section because I found the sub I added to sound quite wobbly. I don't know. I called it Eliminate Sub because I copied the exact harmonies from one of Eliminate's songs. And I added a bit of downsampling to get these high artifacts. And a frequency shifter to introduce it slowly. Heck yeah, okay. We got this noise layer. There's a noise preset in the Axe Nucleon folder. And yeah, I just got rid of the effects. And then you can adjust, as it says here, the cut using the X modulator and the width using the Y modulator. And I recorded some automation in this pattern here to make it natural. So it goes a little bit up and down and then up again. And it sounds like this wind. And towards the end, I lifted up the width and the pitch as well. So then it's kind of more of an electronic music sweep. Then one of my favorite instruments, I used it a couple of times, is the original violin that was pitched down by Non already. And yeah, I just pitched it down 3 semitones to match with my key because I'm in E flat minor and F sharp major. And the original was in F sharp minor. This is how it sounds. Again, huge reverb tails, some delay, using the effector reverb here. Sound Godizer, EQ are doing their thing. Got some soothe. Yeah, on this song I used a lot of soothe with a lot of sharpness, so most resonant frequencies are eradicated in a pretty harsh way. Also, I made it play the first note twice before it actually fades in, so we get this reverb tail before something's playing, actually. And the other effects are, yeah, well, the frequency shifter you just heard. And in the end, I got one ozone imager instance because right before the drop, I wanted it to sound as clean and open as possible. So here I activated it. And also the reverb's gone, as you can hear. And I automated this EQ so the highs would stay the same overall, because if I didn't, it'd sound like this. Also, what you can see here is I'm increasing the use of this volume automation. So it gets more and more choppy. And that's this deep violin. Okay, so this is one of my proudest parts because it just sounds so processed and nothing like the original, although it's coming from the original. So I'm turning off all the effects. And what you can hear is the original drums and percussions that are really good. And I panned them in some crazy ways. So then we got some EQ, taking out the lows, essentially. We got some lo-fi, some pretty strong lo-fi. but it's going away throughout the sounds playing. And then we're coming in with 5 instances of all pass phase, which is kind of like disperser. And then 5 more instances with a different frequency. So one to make the high end go, and one to delay the low mids a bit. Another EQ. And one wider instance, so it's even more wide. Got some compression. So I'm making sure here you can always hear this sound by the same amount amongst all the other elements of the song, if that makes sense. Because if I didn't do that, the loud parts would stick out too much or the quiet parts would go under. So yeah. And finally some delay, which was one of my very final decisions when making the song. So this way, it's more like a background layer that constantly stays there. And now we have this beautiful Fox Stevenson kick here. The first actual multiband sidechaining is happening here. So I'm shaping the lows and the mids around the kick. That's why I like to do it in a playlist. So if you drag this down here, you can definitely see how it's shaped around the kick. And there's a little bit of release time for the mids to come back in and even more on the highs. Although the transient, that's pretty much the only highs information is over here. So yeah, that's my sidechain. Now let's head to one of my absolute favorite sounds of the drop, which is this icy blur. So what that is, I'll have to find out myself. So this is this glass plug sample, pitched up a lot and then playing these high notes. And they have this beautiful high-end bling to them. And you can run them through Edison and use the blur tool. Or you can run them through Fruity Convolver and use the blur white preset. And they both pretty much do the same. And then you're left with this long kind of reverb tail. So I pitched it to come in from below. I'm using it both an octave deeper than originally recorded. And in the drop you can hear it as well on both octaves. And then there's some volume automation going on. On its own, it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's meant to revolve around the things that happen in the drop. And I increased the mids a big lot, essentially this area between the actual notes that were played. So there was barely meant to be any information in there. But yeah, if you increase that on a sample, you always get some kind of noise or something, and that sounded good on this instrument. So yeah. So one of the final sounds before the drop is this wow. It's again from the Snowflake original, pitched down by 3 semitones to fit my pitch. And adding a support layer, which is 2 sine waves playing a bass note. And adding EQ on that. And one little magic thing. And I use it a lot, and I won't spoil what it is. And some delay. So before we head to the drop, to the interesting section, we'll have to talk about the boring vocals. So I'll switch over to that project. Here's some vocals.
No destination, and still you fly. Your body's beauty's too great for the eye.
As you can see, there's a lot of effects, so I will go through each and every one of them.
No destination.
This is straight up from the recording, but declicked and denoised. So I'm running it through Edison, using the denoiser tool, and picking little clicks, little mouth clicks that happen to me all the time, cutting them out, and then going into Newtone and tuning it. And that's what came out of that.
No destination, and still you fly.
A generic EQ here, generic highs boost, and taking out a little bit of the fundamental.
No destination.
Because that one's going to be increased at the end with some multiband compression. of course, we need to de-ess after boosting the highs a lot.
Now destination.
We always want to de-ess because s and f just doesn't sound too good.
Now destination.
Some compression. Sometimes I'm a little closer to the mic as well. Sometimes I'm a little bit more away, and those changes can easily be eradicated. Then I'll activate the sound geyser.
Now destination.
And that way we have our main chain of effects. Now we're onto the fun stuff, which is for once this radio-fi nub, if that's a word that exists, I don't know.
Now destination. Now destination. Now destination. Now destination.
We got some distortion. We got some small room reverb. And finally this EQ setting. You might recognize this preset called radio. But yeah, fading the EQ like that is kind of the sound I was going for here. And of course the high mids boost for the telephony sound. And I think I was using that on the intro.
Yeah. So.
And you can hear it in here.
Yeah.
What's so nice about it is that you can come back from it in a very smooth way. So you definitely hear the vocals getting closer and less radio-y.
Yeah. Hey.
Hey! So in the first wobble section, I'm adding
Snowflake, please tell.
this first harmony layer. It's being widened a bit, and this EQ comes in later. And then it goes through the same vocal bus I was just talking about. So adding this saturation on top, we get us these low, gritty artifacts.
Snowflake, please tell me how you go.
It just always happens when two fundamentals go through saturation, and I kind of like that effect. It reminds me a bit of electric guitars. And yeah, it's just a subtle effect here. And then throughout the second drop at the very end, when it's all peaking in high energy,
Please tell me how you go.
it's pretty strong. So I added this EQ in the end here to get rid of the lows a bit. Again, after, well, these artifacts come in.
Please tell me how you.
And apparently I boosted the highs a bit again. And we got some delay, mostly prevalent in the sections before the drop.
Snowflake, please tell me how you go.
I like to control the input amount as well as the output amount, because sometimes you want to just cut it off entirely. That's what the output is for. And then if you only want to repeat the last word of a sentence, like
Tell me how you go.
like this go here, I don't know if you could hear it.
How you go.
Yeah, then we got some huge epic comet reverb again.
Snowflake, please tell me how you go.
And the effect reverb is only used at one point, which is before the first drop, to extend this last note I'm singing.
Snow.
And it's being tape stabbed by a tape stab, wow, on the pre-master. Has a lot of other instruments. Only thing that's left on the main bus is this swap channels instant. Using a stereo shaper, you can swap the channels like left and right. And I did that when I'm singing this hey.
Hey.
Sounds a bit off, but it kind of makes sense because my delay is using a Haas effect, so the left and the right are not repeated at the exact same time again, but there's quite an offset, and I wanted the left side to be offset, and then the right side, and then the left side. And it sounds weird if you automate the offset amount in the delay, so I did it afterwards as an effect. And finally, we got this last harmony layer. And as you can hear, it's full of highs, and I'm really enhancing the stereo feel here. And big reverb, EQ, and some soothe. So when there's too big of an increase in the highs, those get reduced a bit. And you might want to listen to that with everything together.
Hey, I'm jealous, wish I never knew how it felt to hold him tight.
And that's pretty much everything about the vocals, apart from this whistling towards the end. And I didn't really know this, but of course it makes sense. It's just pretty much a wonky sine wave with some noise around it, so you could probably easily synthesize it, but you'd have to put some humanization on it and yeah, some compression. And that's all of the vocals. So we're finally heading to the first drop, introduced with this reverb tail. Increasing pretty fast towards the end. I kind of liked it to have this sudden amount of tension in your face, bitch. And this is the first bass. What I meant to do, and I think I succeeded, was have a melodic note like the do and just a sub layer and distorting those two together. I mean, it's harmonically interesting and powerful. So this is what it originally sounds like. I think I played around with sub waveform a bit and ended up using this almost square waveform. And then going through the effects one by one, I'm using a camel crusher. We have some distortion here again as well. Some interesting EQ. And after that, getting rid of the highs a bit for mixing purposes. A fat rack, which is my OTT alternative. I'm using FabFilter Pro. And some camel crusher again. Some tube amp, Voxengo tube amp. And some saturation from Melter Production. And another OTT at the end. Some EQ again, and that's pretty much the bass, resampling that, and here's how it sounds. With some more effects. I think it's just some more EQ, getting rid of the highs on the tail, compressing the sub amount a bit. Something I really take care of is that my sub is always the same volume, because I barely use one continuous sub throughout the whole drop, because I want to maintain how it grows together with the individual basses. So yeah, I always want the volume to be the same. And then we got some polyverse wider only on the highs and only on the mids, 2 different amounts, because the sound wasn't wide enough to my ears, and some sound godizer, and pretty much overthinking the whole thing. Some more EQ. Okay, so that's the first bass. And then we're coming in with the violin. And this is the place where the song started. I remember Non teasing what he's most interested in, what the people would do with the stems, and the violin was originally recorded for the song, so of course it's pretty interesting to play around with that. The main melody from the original song goes like da 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 da. And one day my brain spit out this chopped up melody of da da da. And that one together with the 2 chords being major and then the parallel minor. And I ended up transposing it down towards E flat minor. This is how the violin sounds, by the way. I will go through all the effects that are on this violin. This is how it sounded dry. So this is a rack, if you will, I created for fun. I thought if a frequency shifter moves the lows more and the highs less because, well, it's a frequency shifter, what if we split up the bands a little bit and then move the lows a little bit less and the highs a little bit more, and that all towards going up through the whole spectrum. And I created 9 bands here with this frequency splitter. And then, yeah, there's a frequency shifter after that. Then there's this knob here. And this is how that sounds. And I added an option to leave the lows as is. So we only got some more interesting stuff happening on the high end. So then I probably put on this fat rack and felt like there needed to be an EQ beforehand. And this way we got a relatively clean sounding violin. Towards the later iterations, it felt necessary to add a big lot of something that might resemble OTT, but linear phase. And then I'm adding this magic thing again that adds some weird delayed high frequencies on the end. That's what's mixed in here. And then I put on some wider on the highs and cut off the highs a bit. And in the end, some soothe, which is probably the hardest on my CPU when I'm playing, getting rid of the harshest resonances. So that's this violin, and it got a bass support layer. And then we got a bunch of other basses. I called this one the Pac-Man bass, and it has a longer story. So this is how it originally sounded from the bass patch. It's a saw wave, FM'd from a saw wave. Again, with a sublayer underneath it and distorting together with it, which is pretty much all I ever do with my basses. And yeah, some effects on it, some EQ. Ooh. That's the coolest thing about Fat Racks, though. You can pretty much do anything in EQ beforehand and just get some really interesting resonances out of the distortion from the Fat Rack. Then afterwards, you just EQ again and take out what's too much of it, and you get a pretty unique sound. And here's some multiband compression in the end. And I resampled that and pitch shifted it in real time and put some wider on it as well. So that's pretty damn mono. And that's not. Now I put this bass in reverse and add some effects, some reverb, some EQ, some comp filter on the same note, and another Fat Rack, and automate the filter. And you got yourself a really cool new bass. And I used that one and pitch shifted it as well. Doing the reverse thing again, like in my Rewind remix. And it added a delay with a big lot of time modulation. So it goes a little up and down and up and down, and it's really wonky. And when you do that, you probably want to cut off the feedback at some point, taking off the low sides. And here's the EQ again that makes sure that the sub volume is pretty much the same over all basses. And then we got the main bass again, but filtered in and pitch shifted. So the original idea was to have this call and response thing with the same rhythmical meter as the melody. So if the melody goes da da da, we want afterwards. And if the melody goes da 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 da, we want. And I placed those notes here, and I kind of felt like moving the third one a bit to the right, so it's da 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 da, and it felt a little bit more human. And yeah, that might just sound weird because it's not sidechained currently. Oh, sidechain. Well, so when sidechaining, two things are there I aim for, which is A, the sound, and B, the looks. One might be more important than the other, but yeah, sometimes the looks can help you understand what might be wrong about it. I always see this sausage form, so pretty flat, pretty clipped on most of the songs that are well mixed and electronic. So that's what I aim for. Considering the low end, you kind of want to avoid bow ties. So the kick drum goes smoothly into the sub, and there's nothing in between. And with the highs, you can pretty much do what you want. I had the sidechain pretty short at the start because I wanted this acoustic hat to sound like it's coming riding, like. But later throughout the track, the drums would sound more powerful with a more delayed feel on the highs as well. So I shaped it around the kick as well. So looking at the drums, you might have recognized some little percussion elements. So you got little blips that sound kind of metallic. I did the Haas effect on them and swapped the channels in between, and this wood flam thing and this whip. And towards the end of the first half of both drops, we get a little sweep and this hat that's meant to sound realistic, like someone is muting it, and less and less and less the more he plays it. VR riser. And in context. And after this new stretching algorithm, Stretch Pro, arrived to FL Studio, I kind of used it on all kinds of samples. For example, this violin pitched down an octave. Kind of breathy, moving around this format knob here. And then with some effects, but most importantly, a Fat Rack. And then we're heading to the next section of the draw. So we got this Eliminate 808. but with a big bunch of effects. Danny Demand showed me this trick. She told me how I could add some erosion with vocal decks, and apparently that works pretty well. And you can see some saturation, camel crusher, EQ, and making the highs more wide with a really strong transient, which is important because I am distorting them together with a saw stack. I'm fading from a saw wave to a almost square wave, both with pretty high unison, compressing them, and there's a filter moving here. Processing and distorting them together with this 808 made it sound really fat, and this is how that sounds. And this is how it sounds in context. Here's an all-pass phased, over-processed 808 thing. And I use the original Snowflake atmosphere again. But with some volume automation. I always switched it off whenever something really important that needed space would happen in the basses. Like here, for instance. A little bit of a break, and then we're continuing with basses. We got this flute. Very bit crushy, very reverby. Some volume automation on it. Next up, you can hear one of my favorite basses of the whole song. And it came from a bass sample from a sound design session. So most of these effects are compression and EQ. Nothing too interesting, but this harmonic changer is a frequency shifter that applies to a very small part of the spectrum. And I move this part of the spectrum around because I'm pitching down the whole sound here. So, of course, the original position of the harmony I want to changes as well. So you can see that here. And then I'm just moving around the automation until I'm happy with the results in terms of the melody you should play. And that's the main bass. Here you got a little washing out. And it consists of delay and reverb. I'm getting rid of the lows the more I turn it up, and the highs a bit as well. This bass was actually the first thing I de-asked, which was not vocals, because it came into place by moving around the filter. So it starts at the very top and then goes towards the low with a slight delay on the high cut. So at the start, there's a really loud part that's just treble, and that one sounded a little too piercing for my ears. So I de-asked it. And on the final note, I applied some delay. And this delay lasted for very long, so I resampled that so I could control the volume of it. And this is how that sounds. It's like a little rhythmic background layer. The second drop doesn't actually offer too many changes from the first drop. Here's a downshifter. Here's a riser. I made that myself. Changes in the second drop. It doesn't start on the downbeat. It starts 1 quarter note later, just because. So another bass buzz reverb tail. And it originated from the following sound. This house bass sample distorted together with the violin. It made the violin just suddenly really gritty. And I got rid of some of the effects from the violin there. So it's not too much in the foreground because we got the space. And there's a clap now in the drums. Park Stevenson clap. Kick spam. And then we're getting to the second drop. Yeah, here's some VR symbols on top. I made them very wide as well with stereo enhancer and only use the very highest treble. And of course, there are some basses that have enough high end already. So whenever a bass from the bass bus plays, it's sidechained to the heads. Using this patcher setup, you can dark the volume there. So then we're in the final part, which is my favorite part of the song, because all the exciting stuff is getting together there with the vocals again. And there are some little additions and some little reductions, actually. So what you probably noticed is that the main bass is not playing different notes anymore, but it's just going. And that is because there's vocals on top. And I think 2 lead melodies on top of each other, that barely works. So I'm reducing one of them. And Nothing new in dubstep, but I want you to notice again how offbeat these bits of samples are played. Maybe you can see it that way better. So the sweet spot of each of those samples is around here and here and here. And this is where it would be if we were on beat. And yeah, that's just to give it this wonky feel. In the washout part, we got a reverb tail. I'm really curious if you have noticed or if this is something that throws you off somehow, because in the song I jump back between having one iteration of the two chords being 4 bars and having them be 2 bars. And in the first drop, we go 2 bars all the time. And in the verses and in the second drop, we go 4 bars. So it's all pretty much double the length to fit the vocals at the part. And I'm curious if some of you consider that a weird choice. And finally, in the second half of the second drop, I'm using a resonator to get this little colory feel to it. A little bit more chords. My patcher has this resonator preset, and I'm using it only on the mids and the highs because I want the sub to stay clean. Just playing the usual chords F sharp major and E flat minor with a 7th, and running that through the whole bass buzz. I added a fast ARP. Which is just a saw wave with some big unison and small detune, so it's like phasing a lot, and we still have a lot of wideness. I'm even taking down afterwards a bit. And at the very end of making the song, my drop felt a little too weak overall, so I had to add one more backing layer that I called wah. And it is, again, close to a saw wave with a lot of unison and a lot of detune as well. And I'm moving a bandpass filter here. Sorry for that. I got some vibrato on it. And with this curve, I'm making sure that at the sweet spot in the middle, when the bandpass filter hits, it doesn't get too loud. And the second thing I did to make it more strong was to apply a little bit of mastering techniques already on the sidechain bus. So I'm not ruining the drums or anything, but there's some sound codizer. I'm using Maximus here because Maximus is where the sound codizer presets are made. And there you have this LMH mix knob, which is the same thing as the sound codizer knob. And you can automate that, which you can't in sound codizer. So it's strongest on the first drop. And without it, it sounds like this. You can see some of the hats are going through the sidechain as well, because I want them not to be in the way of the main drums, kick and snare. Does make it just a bit louder, but also more full, meaning a little bit more warmer in the lows and a little bit more cleaner highs, if that makes sense. It's turned a little bit down on the second half of the first drop because it does sound pretty different and is a bit louder in general. And yeah, that's that. And I feel like we're through everything of the drops. So now I want to show you the last instruments, which are some little sprinkles on top. Going through the second verse and going through the last part. So in his Water Elemental EP, Sharks has these little garagey sections with really small and minimal pluck sounds, and I really like those. So I tried to recreate that with this sine pluck. And you heard it already. This is just almost a sine wave with a few harmonics, no effects on it apart from a reverb that I'm using to sweep in these reverb tails. And because I felt that might have been a little too boring, I added the same MIDI with this bell sound on top, which is also really close to a sine wave. I think it has some highs on top of it. Yeah, you can see it here. I didn't emphasize them or something. I just added some reverb as well. And then we got this deep cello sample. It has this little white noise on top and it sounded really warm. So octaving it and using it as a bass layer. Second verse also has these little percussions on it. but with less effects. There's no delay on it. And this mini clap. And again, the deep Fox Stevenson kick. And I found maybe it felt like coming home a bit when I'd add this mini arpeggio of the sine plug again before the second wobble part begins.
There's nothing you ever felt I care too much that.
And also I'm bringing back these percussion thingies a little bit early. Differences of the second wobble part. We got a clap here. Minimal vintage clap from Barely Alive. We got this sound. I don't know where it came from. But I feel like I used it somewhere. Maybe you can help me out. Some real feel claps on top. We got this mini riser. Oh, that's just cute. And we got some strings to really go with the flow of the chords this time. And I feel like these vinyl crackles are overused a bit as like intros and giving things atmosphere. But before the second drop, as a slight background layer, yeah, I felt like that was it in context.
I felt to hold him tight.
And as you could hear, there was this little frequency shifter type riser. And that was everything from the second verse. And now what's left to look at is the outro. And I really felt like adding in this little scare, if you will. So what I did here is use the last hit of the bass, which already has this sampled delay tail. It's going through the bass bus, and I added 2 instances of distortion on there because you can see it's really quiet, and I really wanted to boost it towards the end. And I added this guitar layer, which is sweeping in and adds tonality. And it's going down in pitch, like everything is breaking down and it's really epic. And then we got this epic cinematic trailer movie transition, which is meant to be a little surprise then, because we're going back to the bass guitar and the main drums. But I did some post-processing on the master, I think. Yeah, I'll show you that. So this is the master file, and as you can tell, I did a lot of referencing. What I meant to show you was this destructor instance, which has the speaker option. I don't know what it exactly does, but combined with some distortion. And then we're slowly fading out the song. While we're at it, on my master, there is not too much happening. We got some volume automation to make the quiet parts more louder. To boost the very drop moments a bit, I did this to accentuate the scary part before the outro. And we got some general EQ. I was playing around with the amount of highs I should use in the song a lot while referencing. I had at least 2 existential crises over that. And as you can see, we got some multi-band compression here, but on 26% only. We got some Voxengo tube amp that I don't really know what it does, and I don't know if I'd ever use it again, actually. We got this tiny compressor on top, again, to boost the quiet parts a bit. And then we got a soft clipper and some saturation happening. And finally, a clipper, which is Pro L. And I'm always using the practically clipping setting because it's practically clipping, but with true peak limiting, so there's no clipping happening throughout intersample peaks. And that's my master. All right, so thank you very much for sitting through this whole session with me. I really appreciate it. And I also strongly need to rely on feedback concerning these breakdown videos. Maybe you want me to split them up into sections like I did on the Rewind remix, maybe like drums and basses and vocals. But yeah, maybe you prefer this long version. Feel free to tell me. And I can only repeat, I'm working on an EP that is really coming from heart since 1 or 2 years even. I don't really know anymore. And it's probably not coming out this month. But yeah, I'm really excited for it. So if you want to follow me anywhere, there's a ton of links in the description. I don't know. Click one of them and you'll know. Thank you very much. Feel free to ask me any questions on Discord. It's also linked in the description. And have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Snowflake, please tell me how you done. One touch and you melted. I'm jealous. All you do is smile. There's nothing you ever felt.